passes by because, like I've said, once you get older, just time tends to fly by pretty quick. Um, a lot of when I remember, when you're like in high school, like you're a freshman, it's like, oh, it kind of takes forever. Then I'm gonna be a sophomore, so you feel like kind of years don't take a little bit longer and don't go by as quick because you kind of have like a not like I don't want to say like a schedule, but like freshman it's this school year, and then sophomore is this school year, and junior is this school year. So you kind of have, in a sense, like a schedule in your life for those 4 years. So you go based off like what's going on in those years. Your life revolves around those years, and for the most part, it's really nothing crazy other than doing homework. And if you're into like sports and stuff like that, but there's nothing really too much going on. But once you get out of that, that's when you start. It depends, depends if you continue going to school. But for some reason, it kind of changes because you find yourself being a little bit more busy in the sense of if you're gonna go to school somewhere where you have to travel, you got to get a car, and then if you want to get a car, you got to start working. So you start becoming more busy, other than just the regular, go to school and come back home type of thing. And you got to learn how to drive, even though some people don't really know how to drive still. And it's like I always say there's people that everybody needs to drive, but not everybody should drive. Because especially you're on the road. I'm pretty sure you guys have encountered some people driving. You're like, like, well, how are they still alive? Look at how these people drive. But it's like a necessity, like as you're growing up, especially in this area, how there's not a lot of public transport and things like that, other than the MST. I remember when I was in high school, the MST was barely like a new thing, since and I was going to Soledad, so they would call us the MST riders. It's kind of funny, but they would call us the MST riders, so because I would stay late with one of my friends, Daniel, because we were doing football practice, so we would stay until like 5 or 6, and the only way we'd come back is through the bus, so they would call us the MST riders. It kind of sounds like a bike rider or something, but yeah, there wasn't right here in this area. There's not too much public transportation, so one of the main things you got to do is get a car, and get your license, so you can start doing things, either going to school, traveling, or if you're working, especially in this area that we're in, because there's not if you're lucky enough to find a close job, that's good, and if you're not, then you have to drive to go to work and things like that. It could be not too far. It could be very far. I remember I was driving up to San Juan Bautista for a while, so that's kind of a little bit before Gilroy. And after at first you're excited, I'm working and this and that, but once you get into the routine, you're like, man, this is kind of tiring of driving, leaving like almost an hour and a half early to go to work. So you start noticing how your time is changing. How your time is being adjusted. How now time is going by quicker because now you gotta leave early, you gotta do stuff, and you just start getting involved more. But also like with time, with something that when you're trying to do something, patience. Patience is one of the main things that is an indirect action of of time. Because patience is what waiting, and being patient. So you're waiting for time to pass by for something to happen. Sometimes it could, I was at a point where I'm pretty patient for the most part. But yeah, there's times where, you get impatient, like, hurry up, or the common thing, when you're driving and you're in a hurry, you get impatient because everyone's driving not slow, or in a sense, sometimes slow, but, they're driving with the flow of traffic, but you're in a hurry, you're running late, so you want to drive faster. So, you get impatient. You start getting, what do you call it? Road rage, you get impatient, and that's just one small action that we can do. And then there's other things, maybe if you're running late somewhere, you got to pick someone up, and you get outside their house, and they're taking forever, so you start getting impatient. So you're like, hey man, we got to be there at this time or this and that. So you start getting, those are like small things, impatient. There was a couple times I remember more with my brother. We were gonna go hang out with some friends and stuff. And there was this one guy who always took forever. He's gotten better over the years, but he would always take forever. Like, we would go to his house, and he would be like, "Oh, I'm working now," and it's like, dude, we said we're gonna be at your house at this time. He's like, "Oh, it's because I had to do other things." It's like, yeah, but You know, we're all here already. So, oh, like, give me like an hour. And like, so there was a couple of times where my brother's like, hey, well, you know what? Let's just leave him. So we could just leave him. And they could be like, oh, why'd you guys leave? He's like, nah, you're taking forever, man. Like, you know. So, oh, you guys can't be a little patient. I was like, nah, that's not being patient. You know, you're just ill managing your time and not taking into consideration that, you know, we set a time for a reason. But yeah, so we would leave him, you know, hey, you know, too bad, you know. And then, you know, every now and then he would be like, hey, you guys left. And he's like, hey, man. He's like, well, you guys can't be patient. He's like, no, man, not in that case. But like I said, you know, there's certain, and it's just like, you know, small little things that happen. But then when you get a little bit more deeper into it, it's more like, let's say you've been working somewhere for like various years, you know, and you still haven't gotten a promotion, you still haven't gotten a raise, you know, and you're being patient, you've been a good worker, you know, trying to do the best of your ability as you can, and nothing is getting better, so you start losing your patience with the job, you know. Then you start becoming resentful, you start becoming a little bit more, I guess they can say negative, like you start complaining more, you start kind of, you know, singling people out because you start becoming impatient because they're like, hey, you know, I've been here for this many years, I've been a good worker, and I'm not seeing any progress, I'm not seeing anything, and why are these people that haven't been here for so long? So, you know, you start observing, you start seeing all these things. So the patience of you trying to do everything the right way starts, you know, getting eliminated. So then you start becoming impatient, especially with people, you know, you start becoming impatient with like your manager or who's ever in charge of like your department because you're like, hey, you know, I've been putting in work and, you know, nothing has happened. And you see other people that have not been putting as much effort or as much work getting rewarded. So, you know, your patience gets tested, as they say. So with that, I want to go to Romans chapter 8, verse 25. And so Romans chapter 8, verse 25. But if we hope for we do, but if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Simple text. If we wait, no, if we hope for what we do not have yet, we wait it patiently. So, you know, you're waiting patiently, you're hoping, and that's, let's say, work, let's say other things, you know. Maybe you're trying to, you know, working out maybe like something in a relationship with friends or family or anything like that, and you're waiting for like a response for something, and, you know, you have to kind of wait patiently. And I believe there's certain things that you should wait for and, you know, be a little bit more acquainted with being patient, and then there's some things that you shouldn't. But as you get older, as time progresses, you start being able to evaluate those things, be able to, with life experience, you're able to understand the things that you should be patient for and the stuff that you shouldn't really be patient for. And then sometimes, you know, we tend to not listen, or we seek advice, or someone even gives us advice, and we do not really, you know, listen to it because you're like, oh, well, you're not in my position. You don't know how long I've been waiting. You don't know how I feel about this. But, you know, they're guiding you, telling you in a way to be patient, that some things do take time. Some things, for example, I think something that could be very easily related to is, let's say, you know, an individual, and I mean, it's something that I kind of, with time, I always do, and I've mentioned it before, is where I say is that you verify, then trust. And verifying as in, you know, making sure who the person is, making sure how their past has been, in the sense of, are they an honest person with integrity? You know, have they not backstab people? So things like that. So you verify, you know, the individual, and then you are able to trust them. That's what I do. I mean, something that I learned with time. And in the sense, because usually what happens when someone kind of breaks your trust, in a sense, maybe nothing too harsh, but, you know, something that, you know, you break their trust, or they break your trust, you know, you can't really trust them right away, right? It's something that it's going to take time again. You know, it's something that it might take, you know, a few weeks, depending on how big the issue is, or if it's something more severe, something more like, you know, involving finance rules, or something, you know, more on the serious note. You know, it's going to take maybe weeks or even years to fully trust this person again. You know, it's going to take time. And If you reverse it, and if you're the person that broke their trust, then you kind of start, with time has passed by. Maybe you want to clear some things, or maybe you want to settle something. I mean, it could be anything, and you kind of tell them, and they're like, "Well, I don't know, man. I still kind don't really trust you." And you'll be like, "Hey, man, well, that was years ago. Like, you should get over it." And you start getting impatient about that. You start getting a little bit more distraught about it. Like, well, it's already been a while. Get over it. And then it becomes another conflict, and then they start telling you, "Well, yeah, but you see it from my point of view." So how that could become an issue. And trust is something that you gain with time. But there's times, depending, like I said, verify, depending on individual. For example, let's say if someone that's been working in a certain department for many years, and the common thing is that, they know what they're doing, and they're teaching you something, at that moment, you're trusting them, of course, because they verified with their experience and their time. They've been doing it long enough for them to have that credibility for you to be able to trust them at that moment. That's something more simple, something that you can see right away, or an experience right away, a quick trust. But because the person's already been verified throughout the years, and you can be in any type of work, it could be with anything. Obviously, if it's something more like personal relationships and things like that, it takes a little bit more observing, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more, controlling when and how you trust and when you trust. But like it says in, here in verse 25, how to be, wait patiently, be patient and wait patiently. But then there's some things that, like I said, like in that moment, we can trust right away. So the other verse that I want to go to is James chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. And this way it could get a little bit more tricky, as they say. Well, what is more for like in the sense of like spiritual. And James chapter 1, verse 3 and 4 say, "Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish the work so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking of anything." So, here's where it gets a little bit more like testing, testing your faith. It could be like on many things, like if you're, let's say if you're trying to accomplish a job, you're submitting applications, or you're doing all the proper steps in order to get a certain position, anything like that. Sometimes, your faith gets tested because it's easier. I think it's to a certain level with everybody here. It's happened to everybody where you apply or you do something and yet you don't hear a word back. So you start getting kind of distraught, you start losing your patience. But, you kind of testing your faith too, in the sense that, like, hey, God, I've been praying about this. I've been even fasting. I've been doing this and that, and I still don't hear a response. I don't get like an answer. So, at that point, your faith gets tested a bit, because then you start kind of having second thoughts that, maybe your praying is not really working, or your fasting is not really working. So you start doubting God, in that sense. You start your faith gets tested. And like I said, it could be with anything, depending on, the level you're in. It could be anything. So you start getting this, like, again, distraught and feeling uneasy. Your patience starts wearing thin, as they say. But your faith is, at that point, your faith is kind of getting tested. And then verse 4, where it says, "Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking of anything." So everybody knows here what perseverance means, right? Yeah, like you're going through like something, and you're still like holding on to it. You're persevering it. You're still fighting through it, even though you still haven't gotten maybe that exact answer, or you haven't really crossed the finish line type of thing, but you're still continuing. You're still working through it. So, let perseverance. So, continue to, pray about it. Continue to fast. Continue to trust in God. Continue to have your faith being tested. Because, finish the work so you may be mature and complete. So with things like that happen, maturity grows because you mature how to be patient. maybe along the way there might be some people that try to discourage you, be like, hey, you know what, well then forget about it. If you haven't heard an answer, you haven't heard a response, then just do something else. But um, it produces maturity, and maturity like in the sense of like your faith mainly, and then also maturity and life experience, and being patient, because some it's easy to be like, you know what, you're right, I'm not going to do that no more. So you completely do a 180 and you're completely the other direction, when maybe if you would have hold on a little bit longer, you could have accomplished what you were trying to accomplish. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen the meme, right, where it's like two diggers and they're digging, and then the top one like quits, and he had like the gold, and the one on the bottom goes all the way and he's able to get the gold. But if the one that would have continued, the one that stopped would have continued, he would have reached to the gold. Awkward. Let's just ignore that. That's funny. I like awkward moments. It makes people uneasy. Who was it, a kid or who was it? Oh, yeah, so that's even funnier when it's like an adult. um, so you guys have seen that meme, right, where you continue. So sometimes, there might be people trying to tell, yeah, do something else, change it. And, it's easy to kind of be like, yeah, you're right. But like I said, sometimes there's certain things where you should kind of like, hey, you know what, you're right, because at the end of the day, this is not helping me, or it's kind of like a dead end, like feeding a dead plant with water, watering a dead plant. You're going to continue like, oh, my perseverance is going to help. So you're watering the plant, but it's already dead, so you can continue watering it, but it's not going to get any better. But, like I said, that depends on the level of where you're at in life, the situation. And because, I could be very, like generalization, like, oh, for work, just keep on doing this, keep on doing that, and keep on doing this. But at the end of the day, I'll use myself an example, where I work at. I've been there for a while already. And there's times, we've asked for a raise and this and that. But now the time has passed long enough that we know that that's not going to happen. So we just kind of, all right, I'm not going to persevere and keep on, hey, yeah, it's like be realistic and understand that you kind of met that, like you met the top of that place already. So, you're not going to get anything else out of it. So, instead of, I'm going to lose my patience because I'm not getting what I'm asking, it's like, no, understand and realize the realization, be realistic that you've already met the highest you can get there. So instead of, focusing on that, focus on something else instead, maybe, stop putting your focus at, I'm going to work harder. So like that, I can, he can see, or they can see that I'm hardworking, and it's like, no, dude, you already met your limit. But you have to understand that, you have to acknowledge that. Because a lot of people don't do that, they just continue, and they get mad because they're not meeting, they're not getting what they're asking. And it's like, well, realize that you are hitting a dead end, as they say, But with maturity, with life experience, with certain situations, you come to understand when you should do that. It doesn't just happen for every situation. If you continue, and I guess maybe the best way that you can use that patience, that perseverance, is like if you're starting a business, because that takes a lot of time, or if you're trying to build something, anything that kind of requires more like on your end, that like if you put in the work, you get the outcome. That's where patience kind of works a little bit harder on you, because you're doing the work, you're putting in the work, and you're not really seeing the results. I mean, how many times haven't you guys seen videos of people, or just like testimonies of people that said that, oh, when I first started, I wasn't getting a sale. When I first started, I wasn't getting no views. When I first started, no one was really buying my product. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen a plethora of videos and people saying things like that, And usually most of them say, no, I continued, and now, they're very successful. And that's the nature of it. When you're starting something, it's easy to get discouraged when you don't see the outcome that you worked so hard on. So you start losing your patience, like, oh, maybe this was a bad idea, or maybe, and then, sometimes, unfortunately, like, it's happened to some of us, happened to me, where you do try to do something, and at the end, unfortunately, it just didn't work. And then that's also a thing, that how do you react to that, like if something didn't work, you're like, oh, but I put in my time, I put in my work, I put in all my effort, I was patient. And I marked all the boxes, that to do everything so it can come out right. And sometimes, unfortunately, it just doesn't come out right. But at the end, you shouldn't take that as like a. I mean, it is a loss, but you shouldn't take it as a complete loss. Where now maybe there's certain steps that you did wrong or that you shouldn't have done, or you put focus on something that was not prioritized with something that should have been prioritized. So you learn, you take it like as a lesson and you start learning. And maybe next time you want to do another project or next time you want to do something, now you understand it better and you can work through it better. So, and then now you've experienced patience, but now, it's more directed, it's more aimed. Sometimes we have patience, but it's like blind patience. Like I said, with the job that you're just, oh, hopefully I'll get that raise. When at the end, the dudes on the top are like, look at this guy, what a joke. He keeps on asking for a raise and he's putting in a bunch of work. And I mean, we're not going to give it to him, but, just we'll keep on telling him that we are next year. And, we'll just keep him kind of like a slave, because he's just right there working. And I mean, the people on top know that he's not going to get anything out of it. So, you get kind of caught up in the slave. And like I said, that's kind of a dead end, but but I'm not saying that all the jobs are like that either, Of course, don't be like, oh, well, he said that I should just stop working and be lazy, because I'm not going to get a raise. No, I'm not saying that either. But like I said, with time, you start understanding things like that, with life experience, you start understanding things like that. And then the other verse that I want to get to is in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 3. So in chapter 2, verse 3. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Through it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and not delay. So, like I said, when it comes to like a, kind of like a business or something that you're putting in the work, like it said, wait patiently, but work through it too, Sometimes we just kind of sit there and cross our arms and feel like, oh yeah, it's gonna happen, it's gonna work, it's gonna have its effect. But as long as you put in work, because sometimes you might put in some work and then you might think, oh yeah, well I put in the work already, so now I'm just gonna wait for it to happen. It's like, no, that doesn't work either. You got to continue to put in work, even though maybe sometimes that things that might not happen at that moment that you wish it would, but they don't happen. Something that I kind of not as much anymore, but I got in the bad habit of doing was when I was working at those different states and stuff, is everything had to be done quickly, and there was no time for like, for example, like there was this one time we're going to like a training lane and we needed the Kevlars, the helmets, because you need to have a Kevlar to ride like in Humvees or in tanks and things like that. It's mandatory. So some of our people were gonna ride into some vehicles, so everyone needed a Kevlar. So the point is that I was like, okay, how many people are riding vehicles? And, you would get like the accountability. So then I would call someone and be like, hey, I need this many Kevlars. Oh well, then they would the girl, she would be like, oh well, do you know exactly? I was like, dude, like, don't explain to me. I just need like 4 Kevlars. Just bring them. I don't care how you get them. Just get them, And, oh, okay. And they would bring them, and I'd be like, okay, perfect. That time worked. And then the second time it would happen, I would call again and be like, hey, I need 6 Kevlars. She's like, oh, do you know the size? Like, dude, just bring 6 Kevlars. Don't tell me anything else. Just bring the 6 Kevlars. We'll figure that out. We'll measure people's heads when they're here, and we'll see who goes in what. Like, don't worry about that. Just bring the Kevlars. Oh, okay. And, then another time with a different person, I would call her and be like, hey, I need Kevlars. Okay, how many? 6. Okay. They would understand that I needed what I needed without making too many, like, questions. Like, just get what I need. So I would get into the habit of that, of not having like patience for well, over there, it was tolerable. I could do that. I was able to tell people like, dude, don't tell me anything. Just get this and do that, and that's it. I don't need a whole explanation. But when you come back over here and with people, it's different. You can't really be like that with people, you know. So I got kind of like in a habit of being like that when like sometimes my brother or my mom they would call me they needed something, or I needed something. I would be like very like direct, like I don't care what store you're in, just go to that store and get it. Like don't explain to me that you're over here and that you got to go through this. Like no, I don't care about that. But it was like, hey, dude, like they were funny because they would be like, "What's your problem, man?" And I was like, "Sorry, it kind of you get into that mindset where you start not having, but at that time, it was part of work and that's how it was. You start having no patience or nothing like that because they ask of you something, and then so you ask of something from someone, but you need a quick answer because they need a quick answer from you. Because then they would ask me like, "Hey, so you got the Kevlars?" I'd be like, they're on their way. So I would try to tell you, hey, call them. Where you at? Oh, I'm over here. Well, hurry up. So then I would be, not patient and be like, well, hurry up. It's not that hard to get, 6 Kevlars. Yeah. So the patience was very thin at that. Was very, how would they say, thin ice. But I would try not to be like that with people because then the saying where like, oh, don't question or don't ask or don't look excuses because you're walking on eggshells because he's not going to listen to you. I try to be not to be like that too because it's easy to fall into that of not having no patience, but because that's what the job requires is for you to always be ready and to always have everything like at the disposal of like, hey, we need this or I get it and that's it. You got to be quick. So at that moment that was the job. That's how it works. Not having patience, but for certain things, yes, and for other certain things, no, because it would be funny because we'd be all in a hurry to get the whole lane situated, everybody on board. All right, perfect. We would go to at that point I wasn't going anymore, but they would go to where they were going to do the training. And once they got to the training, they had to wait like hours for one of the COs to come over and approve the training. It's like, all right, you're good to go. But they would wait hours. So, I mean, there's a term that they call it hurry up and wait. So when you hurry up, you get everything, and then you just wait for hours. At first, when I was first doing that, I would be like, well, what was the point of us being in a hurry if we're just going to wait here for hours? Like, well, that's not really the point. The point is to be able to get everything ready. And, once you get to the spot, whatever happens at that point happens. But as long as you had everything ready. So, they would call that hurry up and wait. So it would be easy because the people that were new, they would at that moment they would understand that because they would come back and be like, hey, well, you guys were all in a hurry, get this, get that, and then we waited there forever, and I'll be like, well, if you had everything ready, you wouldn't be rushing, and you wouldn't feel this way. So I remember this one time where it was very crucial for you to have a pen. I know it sounds very funny, but you had to have a pen. Because when you would go out to the training, you would have to, at that point, I would be doing that. I would have to observe the training and then write down notes of what they were doing. Oh, the convoy was attacked. Oh, they spotted an IED. So you always had to write everything down for what they would call them AARs, after action review. So you would write down a bunch of notes. So you had to have a pen. That was like, if you didn't have a pen, you couldn't oversee the training, and you couldn't write the notes, and you couldn't send them to the AARs, and then they would be like, well, what were you doing? There's a lot of stuff. But the point is that you had to have a pen. And I remember this one time, it was me and this other guy, and he lost his pen, and he was panicking. Hey, bro, do you have a pen? And I was like, oh, I don't think I have a pen. And he was like, oh, I need a pen. And then I remember they called the person that was in charge of us, and they're like, hey, do you have a pen? And I was like, oh, yeah, we have plenty of pens. Yeah, we have plenty of pens. Why? Oh, I need a pen. And it's like, well, why didn't you get one when you left? It's like, oh, it's because I was in a hurry and this and that. It's like, well, you see. And then we have, not to get into the lore of it, but we had these sheets called 2062s where everything you took out, you had to fill it in. So if you had a pen, you had to one pen. And, and you had to put your signature. It's very tedious, but I mean, now that I was able to, with time I understood that, but at that moment, yeah, you had to put one blue pen, and then you had to put your initials to confirm that, yes, you got a blue pen. And then it was like, well, did you, and then when the guy that lost the pen was talking to the guys in charge, he's like, well, did you put that on your 2062? And he would be like, and so they would go and check. He's like, no, you didn't fill that in your 2062. If you would have done your 2062, you would have noticed that you didn't have a pen, and you would have gotten a pen. And then right now you wouldn't be in this problem where you do not have a pen. And not helpful at all. But at the point, the guy was like, so he's not like, well, figure it out, use your blood, or something, but figure it out, and just hung up on him. And he was like, what do I do, man? And I was like, use blood? And I was like, well, let me check. And now, I did have a pen at the end. I went through my stuff and I actually had a pen. He's like, oh, you're a lifesaver. I was like, oh, man. And then after we would laugh about it because, we were literally losing our mind, or he was losing his mind over a pen. Something so simple. But, in that work, it's very crucial to have all those little things. But, pushing it back to the whole thing of patience and waiting. And, in that moment, you're always rushing and hurrying up and stuff like that. And then sometimes, let's move away from that and put it more into a bigger life perspective. Sometimes we jump into things. We jump into work. We jump into maybe relationships as in friends, family, and things like that. We jump into quick things like that. And at the end of the day, they don't really work out properly. I'm pretty sure you guys have, depending on the situation, have jumped on something very quickly, not really prepared for it. And at the last minute, it was the bad decision, or it didn't work out how you planned, or it was too rushed, and you didn't get all the parts correctly. You can put that in, like I said, in many things, in relationships, situations, work. That's the easiest thing with work. And school, I think it's school because everything's kind of accessible to you when you're in, grade school, as in, high school, middle school. Everything's accessible to you. As, if you have a problem with something, you can ask the teacher. Once you get more into college, university, that tends to lower down a bit. The professors are available, but you got to provide your own resources, so it gets a little bit more responsible and things like that. But like I said, in school, you have a little bit more accessible to things, and so maybe your patience isn't as tested as much. Maybe on smaller things, but like I said, once you get older and you start working and relating more with people, that's where you can see that your patience gets tested more. How you act to it, how you react to it. Sometimes you lose your patience and you blow out, and you maybe tell people off without really wanting to. How many times do you guys maybe done it or seen people do it where they just blow off and maybe tell someone off, or get mad at someone, and then after that happens, it's kind of I think he overreacted. Maybe that person way overreacted. But, at that moment, maybe that person was on the thin line of patience. Maybe they've been waiting forever, and, they just lost their patience at that moment. So it's a very, patience, it's something that you can, be applicable to many things, many different situations. Like I said, depending on the level you're in, depending on what you're doing, how small, how big, may not even have an impact on your life at all. There's always a saying that if something is not going to affect you within the next 5 years, don't worry about it too much. And it goes back to the same thing where, depending on the situation, maybe it could affect you in not in 5 years, but maybe in 10 years, For example, if you're not eating healthy, when you're young and stuff, you're not eating healthy or not doing anything like that, it may not affect you right away in 5 years, but, when you get older, you'll start feeling the effects of all that stuff. Bad health, maybe bad joints if you don't do no exercising or anything like that. So, it's something that, might not see in 5 years, but, you definitely will see it in the future. And because I'm pretty sure everybody here knows someone that, now that they're older, they're having a lot of maybe health issues and things like that. And it's oh, bro, si te hubieras cuidado cuando estabas joven, stuff like that. You should have taken care of yourself when you were younger. Ya ves, por tomar mucha soda, the usual. Mucha soda, te enfermas porque estás en el teléfono. I think when texting was becoming a thing, talking all back in the day, but when I was in high school, texting was barely kicking in. Everybody was still using the flip phones with the little tapping 3 numbers to get one letter. So everybody would be on it sounds kind of funny now that I think about it, but everybody would be on their phone a little bit longer, because if you were trying to send a sentence, right now you can just kind of back then be you have to be tapping a bunch of numbers, so you would be longer on the phone. And I remember it was like a thing, like, oh, that's why you're. I mean, they probably still say it now, but there was a thing like, oh, that's why you're sick because you're always on the phone. Or like, oh, that's why you're going blind because you're always on your phone. It was like the phone was blamed for everything apparently, um, but just kind of to finish up and kind of hopefully you get the idea that patience it's a and that's also a virtue. At the end of the day, back what was it, like a month or 2 months ago when we were going over the fruits of the spirit, patience is one of the main virtues, and patience is a virtue. Not everybody has it. I'm pretty sure everyone here knows one person that is very impatient. I know many people that are very impatient, and even though, like I said, it could be for small things that you can be, oh, it's very impatient, and you see how they react. But like I said, I think we all have that. I have moments where we get impatient with people, with things, with situations. And like I said, me, and when I was working, getting impatient with the people, cutting them off. And now that I think about it, it's kind of funny because it's pretty rude now that I think about it, But it was like, in my head, I was like, when I would talk to them after, I'd be like, don't take it personal. It's just no job, man, But, then I would think about it like, oh, what about if I was the receiving end of that, Like me being like all worried, like, oh, which sizes? And it's like, well, figure it out. And he's just hanging up on me. I'll get mad. I'm pretty sure that person probably cussed me out or whatever at that moment. Like, this guy, who does he think he is? But all that. But with patience, we should always try to have a little bit more patience and perseverance because, like I said, depending on, work or business, relationships, having patience and perseverance, fighting through it. And, also with God's timing, that's the main thing too is, God's in control. Maybe there's something that we're working on and, like I said, watering a dead plant. And, there's times where maybe God's trying to tell you like, hey, this is a dead end. Like, this is the dead plant that you're trying to water. You should move away from that. But we get, stubborn. Yeah, we're patient, but then we get stubborn and like, no, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. I've done this for many years and this and that. So you start getting stubborn and egotistical, or it's more now your pride. It's not really much of you being patient and being, humble. It's more like, no, I'm going to do it because I said I'm going to do it. And it's your ego talking. And it's not even you having faith. It's not even you, being patient with God's timing. It's just you being, egotistical and, your pride and being stubborn. And, with time, like I said, usually with life experiences, taking people's advice, with your parents, see what they tell you, all that stuff, you acquire it and, you get it like formulas, you get the formula and then you implement it in certain situations. And there might be certain situations where that formula may not work. So, take it to a different direction, make some adjusting, improvise. I think that's one of the biggest things is sometimes when, we're being patient with something, we try to stick so much to one direction and we don't learn how to improvise in certain ways, but improvise in a positive way, Maybe try something new, try something else that might work, and then actually your patience might pay off because by you being patient, it led you to learn something new, and with learning something new, you're able to take it a different direction, and maybe that's the direction that you needed to take, but since you were just not open to it, you didn't get nowhere, but doing that, helps you meet your goal. There's a lot of ways you can put it. Life is it's a plethora of situations, problems. Everyone has different, things going on, different mindset. Some are brighter than others. Some, as I always say, they're not the sharpest tool in the shed. There's some people that their brains maybe are not at full capacity. There's some people whose brains have no capacity. There's, they're not the brightest crayon in the box. That's because, and I'm not saying this because I know like everything or anything like that, but I'm just saying because once you have certain knowledge of certain things and stuff like that, you start seeing, with experience, you start seeing how some people like do not understand. So you're like, dude, how do you not understand this? Like, I'm explaining to you, I'm showing you, I'm being patient with you, and they still don't understand, but they work differently. Their brains probably work differently, and you kind of have to, adjust in order to be more patient, so. Like I said, every situation has a different way of being patient. And as long as we are patient and we rely on our faith, and of course, we pray, we fast, we, read scripture, like I said, on these 3 verses, just a small portion of, what the Bible tells us of being patient, of perseverance, of waiting and believing and having faith. And, and everything comes in God's timing. And even though that gets thrown around a lot, but at the end of the day, it is true. We wait on God's timing, and it could be for many things. Like I said, situations, works, business, on many things. But as long as we're patient, we have faith, and we pray about it, I do believe that we'll reach our goal, and hopefully not lose our patience during that time. And so with that, I kind of want to conclude and do a quick prayer so we can stand up. Thank you, God, for having us here today. Thank you, Lord, for our message in the morning and to help